Tractate Sotah is the tractate which goes through the laws of the special Sotah ceremony in the temple. Essentially, adultery is forbidden. If it's confirmed that a woman was adulterous, she must divorce her husband and does not receive her marriage contract. However, in the event that she only suspected of adultery, for instance she was in seclusion with another man, she can prove her innocence by undergoing the Sotah ceremony. Assuming she's innocent, she can choose to go to the temple, where she takes an oath of her innocence and then drinks of prepared bitter waters, which is basically just water with a scroll containing relevant verses from the Torah dissolved into it, which, after a lengthy process, she's made to drink. If she's innocent, then nothing happens, and she actually receives several blessings of fertility. But if she was guilty of adultery, and for some reason still decided to go through with this ceremony, her body would miraculously, immediately physically degrade, she swells, and then dies, along with the man that she did adultery with, wherever he is. This is all described in these verses from the Torah. Chapter 1 will begin the discussion on these laws. The first Mishnah says, according to Rabbi Eliezer, a man can warn his wife against seclusion with another man before 2 witnesses, and can have her undergo the Sotah ceremony based on 1 witness or his own testimony. Rabbi Yeshua says both require 2 witnesses. For instance, if the husband warned the wife to not speak to an individual before 2 witnesses and she did it anyways, that's still permissible, meaning they don't divorce. And if he's a Kohen, she can still eat teruma. If she entered a secluded place with the other man and remained there long enough for them to have been adulterous, they must divorce and she can't eat teruma. And if her husband dies childless, she must do chalitza and can't do yibum, the levirate marriage with his brother. The Gemara explains, in regards to the order of tractates, Nazir goes next to Sotah, as it said that if somebody sees the Sotah ceremony, he should stop drinking wine, as the Nazirite vow would forbid, as drinking wine leads to such transgressions. The order, however, is of Tractate Sotah first, and chapter 7 of that discusses vows. So afterwards went Tractate Nedarim, which is all about vows, and afterwards went Tractate Nazir, which is about a specific type of vow, and now we're doing Sotah for that above-mentioned reason. Also, the wording of if the husband warned the wife is past tense, teaching that after the fact, the husband warning the wife to stay away from a certain person is valid, but it's not something that should ever really be done initially, as it could damage the relationship and cause issues. It also lists many teachings sages would say prior to teaching this whole topic, when said that women and men are paired in heaven for marriage in accordance with their deeds. Some said that marriages are determined at conception, but to determine a remarriage is as difficult as splitting the Red Sea. Further, it said that all opinions agree that a single witness is believed to testify about seeing an actual act of cohabitation, and it brings sources. This is debated based on if the Hebrew term for witness refers to 2 witnesses or a single one, and how that would necessitate additional teachings. The debate between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua as to whether we require 1 or 2 witnesses is based on the interpretation of verses. Some say Rabbi Eliezer would actually hold that he only requires 1 witness to warn the woman, and 2 witnesses for her to do the Sotah ceremony, the inverse of his stated opinion. However, according to this and all similar opinions, this could cause issues of the husband claiming afterwards he had warned her when he actually hadn't warned her. Practically, it says, now that there's currently no temple, there's no concept of warning a woman to not seclude with somebody, out of concern that we follow this opinion that 1 witness is sufficient, as if she does seclude with that person, she was warned legally, so she can no longer be with her husband, and she can't resolve it by doing the Sotah ceremony, as there's no temple. The terminology for warning used is also a word which implies anger. Some say as after the husband's warning, the woman will seclude herself from the community, causing anger from the community. Some say it's because it causes anger between the husband and wife. According to these opinions, it's forbidden for a man to warn his wife against seclusion with another man. Related, it speaks on the negativity of sinning in private, and also says that a person does not sin unless a spirit of folly enters him. It further debates from a number of sources, as if it's permitted for a man to warn his wife about these matters. Some say it is allowed, some say it's actually required. This is discussed. It discusses some, for the debates, some said in regards to Canaanite slaves, it's permitted to acquire them. Others held that it's a requirement that they can't be emancipated. This is debated from a number of sources and explanations on certain verses on the subject. In addition, it further speaks on how terrible adultery is and how terrible anger is. And it says that before people did adultery, the divine presence dwelled among all of them. It also speaks on how good deeds and sins go before a person in the world to come. It further debates sources for the amounts of witnesses. It also gives additional definition as to exactly how long a forbidden period of seclusion is, which is said to be at least the time it takes to do the beginning of cohabitation, which, among several other definitions, is defined to be the time it takes to walk around a palm tree. These different definitions are all qualified. It also speaks on the importance of washing before eating bread, citing verses and sources for its great necessity, and also how greatly negative it is to be haughty, and similar concepts. It also cites verses talking about how poor arrogance is and its consequences, along with the great importance of humility as seen by Mount Sinai, where the Torah was given on the smaller mountain, and also that God rested his presence on a thorn bush. There's further on the negativities of haughtiness. It also qualifies if the husband warns his wife to not talk to somebody, and she talked to him or secluded herself with him, or she was told to not seclude herself and she only spoke to him, they're still married. They only divorce if he warned her against seclusion with another man, and she then secluded herself with him for a period. It also cites verses that show such a woman can't do yibum, the Levirate marriage, and she requires chalitza, as if her husband would have been alive, they would have had to divorce anyways. There's variation on this. It also cites other additional sources for this concept. New Mishnah. The following woman cannot eat teruma: a woman who admits she committed adultery, a woman who had witnesses testify on her that she had committed adultery, a woman who refuses to undergo the Sotah ceremony, a husband who doesn't want the woman to undergo the Sotah ceremony, and a woman who cohabited with her husband while traveling to Jerusalem to do the Sotah ceremony. The Gemara debates based on this and verses that for a woman to undergo the actual Sotah ceremony, there would need to be no witnesses that she actually did the adultery. Some hold like this and explain their sources, others disagree with this principle and debate them. This is for the questions based off of several other conversations, and it also says some opinions as to whether other merits from the Sotah would push off her punishment to a later time based on some verses. New Mishnah. If the woman secluded herself with the man and became suspected of adultery, the husband takes her to court, who provide 2 Torah scholars to escort them to Jerusalem, so that way they don't cohabit along the way, which is forbidden. Others say we just trust the husband on his own. The Gemara explains that this case is not a proof that 3 men are allowed to be alone with a woman on the road, and not less, being 2 men, which is definitely not allowed in case one leaves to use the restroom and the remaining is in seclusion with the woman, and they would then impermissibly cohabit. As here, in this described case, the extra men are acting as witnesses. Torah scholars specifically are brought as they can warn the husband not to cohabit, as they know the laws, and it's not because of their proper character. It also explains the sources for the opinion that the husband is just trusted to not cohabit with his wife in this situation. New Mishnah. The husband and escort bring her to the high court, the Sanhedrin in Jerusalem, who attempt to get her to just admit her guilt, so that way they don't need to do this ceremony, similar to what they would do by capital punishment with listed words. If she admits she did adultery, she writes a receipt for her marriage contract and is divorced. If she does not, she's taken to the East Gate, where they give the Sotah drink, purify women who had given birth, and people who had tsaras, leprosy. A Kohen then holds her clothing, and it's permissible if they tear, and exposes her chest and unbraids her hair. This was done to be embarrassing, to discourage people from doing things that make them suspect of doing adultery, and also as a punishment of sort for her secluding herself improperly with another man. Others say they would not do this if she was pretty, to prevent anyone from thinking improper thoughts during this whole ceremony. If she was dressed in white, she would now wear black. If she was wearing gold ornaments, rings, chokers, or otherwise, they're removed so that way she doesn't look pretty. Her garments are then tied with palm fiber above her chest, covering herself. Anyone's allowed to watch that ceremony besides for her slaves or maidservants, as the Sotah woman might become emboldened seeing them and then falsely testify. Other women are allowed to watch this based on the verse so as to discourage this whole thing. The Gemara cites the scriptural source for these points. It says we discourage the woman from undergoing the ceremony, as cited before the scroll was dissolved into the water. Afterwards, she's encouraged to do the ceremony so as to prove her innocence. It also goes through the things the court explains to her. They teach her the portions of Tamar and Yehuda and of Reuven, who confessed their sins and things ended up good for them, and it cites these incidents. It also says they make her walk to the East Gate, so that way she'll be tired and likely to just admit it if she had done adultery, and therefore not need to do the Sotah ceremony. It also says people of the Zavin and Zavos emissions, which are types of impurity, are also purified by this location. It also says we don't do 2 Sotah ceremonies at the same time, so that way they don't refuse to admit to committing adultery, because they'll see the other woman also doing the Sotah ceremony and become more confident. Some allow this by a woman who is actively visibly afraid, as long as it's done by a single Kohen, as mitzvahs shouldn't be done in bundles. The opinion which says we cover a woman during the Sotah ceremony says this would apply here, as there's a possibility she'll be innocent and the younger Kohanim will think improper thoughts and try to be improper with her. But by capital punishment, he would hold any convicted person who's not clothed although others would disagree by a woman, but this opinion says there's no concern of people being improper with her, as she's receiving capital punishment, and the concern is only by her, as there's a tradition that the evil inclination prevails only over things you see yourself. Others say simply the intent is just degradation, which isn't super applicable by capital punishment, but some would say that degradation is considered to be worse than physical suffering. The remaining steps are qualified, and it says that some holds that women are actually obligated to watch the Sotah ceremony. New Mishnah. It said that how a person acts, that's how God deals with them. This is seen by the punishment of an adulteress. Through the Sotah ceremony, she dressed up to commit adultery, so now she's dressed down. She revealed herself to sin, so her sin is revealed to all. She sinned with her thigh and stomach, so she's punished through her thigh and stomach, which become physically deformed after the Sotah ceremony, along with the rest of her body. The Gemara says, even though capital punishment doesn't exist any longer, as the Sanhedrin no longer exists, God still punishes people in that measure. If somebody deserved death by stoning, they'll fall from a roof or be trampled by wild animals. If somebody deserved burning, they'll fall into a fire or be bitten by a snake. If somebody deserved beheading, the country authorities will execute him or bandits will kill him, and if somebody deserved strangulation, they'll either drown in a river or get a choking disease. It further describes how each step of the adulterer's seduction and cohabitation are referenced throughout steps of the Sotah ceremony. It additionally cites verses on the topic of divine punishment and many related points. It also says that the tabernacle and its parts are hidden underneath the temple sanctuary. It also says how the serpent by Adam and Eve were punished in a similar manner. It was originally supposed to be the king of all the animals. It was supposed to walk on legs and eat the same food as people, but now it's a cursed creature that crawls on its stomach and eats dust. It goes through the remaining points on the measured punishment by the Sotah. New Mishnah. Similarly, Samson followed his eyes, so his eyes were gouged out. Avshalom gloried in his hair, so he was hung by his hair, and he cohabited with his father's 10 concubines, so he had 10 spears thrust into him, and he stole 3 things: the heart of his father, the court, and of Israel, so he had 3 other spears thrust into him. The inverse applies also for good. Miriam waited for her brother Moshe in the basket for an hour, so the entire Jewish people in the desert didn't travel, waiting for her for 7 days when she became impure. Joseph buried his father and was greatly honored, so his bones were brought up by Moshe, and God buried Moshe. And it's also said that God attends to all of the righteous after their passing. The Gemara cites many related verses and teachings in regards to Samson and the reason for his punishments, along with points on his wife, Delilah. There are many further points, and it goes through Samson's life, explaining many verses and teachings from Scripture on him. It also explains some points on Tamar and also on the forefather Abraham. It explains that Abraham was extremely hospitable and would explain to all of his guests that the food came from God and they should thank and bless God. There are further points on the incident of Tamar and Yehuda, going through all of the verses and their explanation. It also goes through the verses on the death of Avshalom, and it says that after his hair was caught as he fled, he went to cut his hair with his sword, but he saw the depths of Gehenna open up beneath him. It also says that when David cried over his son's passing, he said, "My son," 8 times to remove him from the 7 chambers of Gehenna. And the last one, some say Avshalom's head was reunited with his body, some say it was to bring him to the world to come. There are further points, and it explains that Miriam waited for her brother for an hour and was repaid far greater with 7 days later. The verses are cited. In addition, at the beginning of the story of the Jewish people's slavery in Egypt, it says, "A new king arose over Egypt." Some take this to mean that this was a new king. Some say it means that he made new decrees based on the fact that it never said that the old king died. And when it says he did not know Joseph, it means he acted like he didn't. There are further explanations. It says the Pharaoh said, "Come, let us act wisely regarding it." It says it, not them, as he meant in regards to God based on verses. The wisdom that they thought of was that it said that God will repay punishment through fire or the sword, but God promised to never again flood the world. So they thought to drown the babies in the Nile River, not realizing God hadn't promised to not flood a single nation. It also says Pharaoh had 3 counselors: Balaam, who gave the advice to drown the babies and who was eventually killed; Eov, Job, who was silent and suffered; and Yisroi, Jethro, who ran away in protest, so he greatly merited through his descendants. Based on further verses, it is explained that Pharaoh pretended to work to coerce all the Jewish people to partake in the labor to eventually become slaves, and they eventually built the cities of Pithom and Ramses, called that as the word means to fall apart, essentially, which the buildings that they were building constantly would fall apart, so that way the Jewish people would have to keep working. There are further verses. It says that the women were made to do men's work and the men were made to do women's work. It also says that it was the merit of a righteous woman that the Jewish people were freed from Egypt. that they would prepare water and food for their husbands and sneak over to them to be with them based on verses. It also says the woman would go to give birth beneath the apple trees, and God would send angels to take care of the babies and would give them stones to nurse from, which contained oil and honey. And when the Egyptians went to grab the babies, they would be sucked underground, so the Egyptians would park their oxen and plows over the area, but when they left, they'd pop back out, and this is why these children recognized God first by the splitting of the sea. Pharaoh summoned Jewish midwives to advise him, it says, summoning women named Shifra and Puah, and some say the individuals were actually Yocheved and Miriam, who were called that because of how they took care of the newborns as midwives. There are further points on this. It's explained that the midwives told Pharaoh that the Jewish people are compared to various wild animals, a lion, a serpent, an ox, a wolf, and others. They say that the Jewish women did not require midwives. They were rewarded with their descendants, being the Kohanim and Levium and David, who was the descendant of Miriam. It further expands on several other scriptural figures referenced by other names. It's also said that Pharaoh threw his own people's babies into the river. It's also said that Amram, Moshe's father, saw that all of their male children were being thrown into the Nile, so he stopped having children at all, and then all the other Jewish people followed suit, until Miriam said that that was wrong as she was preventing even women from being born. So Amram remarried his wife with a whole ceremony, so that way all the Jewish people would follow. It also calculates the age of Yocheved, Moshe's mother, based on the fact that it said she was conceived en route to Egypt and born between the walls of Egypt. And the verse calls her young, in spite of the calculation making her therefore be extremely old. So it said that she resembled a young woman. It also said that she gave birth without pain, as did all of the scriptural righteous women. It also says that Moshe's name given at birth was Tovia. Some say it shows that he was fit for prophecy, some say that he was born circumcised, and some say that their house was filled with light. It says Yocheved hid him for 3 months, as she had given birth very early and couldn't wait any longer, as the Egyptians would take their babies into the houses and then hurt their own babies, making them cry, so that way the hidden babies would cry, allowing them to be found. So she hid Moshe in a wicker basket, either wicker because the righteous are very particular with their property, or so it wouldn't break on a hard object. It had tar put on the outside and clay on the inside, so that way Moshe wouldn't need to smell the tar, and she put him in the river. It says Pharaoh's daughter went to wash in the river, which is explained that she wanted to spiritually wash after having been around her father's idols. She saw the basket, and it says that her maidservants criticized her for not following her father's decrees and trying to rescue this baby, so the angel Gabriel struck down all of the maidservants. Some say one was left to fetch the basket. Some say that she went to take it herself, and based on the wording, it shows that her arm miraculously stretched out to reach the basket. There are further points. It says she knew he was Jewish as he was circumcised. And it says that after this, the Egyptian astrologers saw that the savior of the Jewish people would be stricken by water, so they ended their decree, but they didn't realize that this was a reference to Moshe striking the rock of the well of Miriam much later on. It goes further and describes the dates that all this was occurring on. It also says that Miriam offered to fetch a Jewish wet nurse, as Moshe refused to nurse from any of the Egyptian ones, as that would have been of non-kosher food. There are additional points on Moshe's mother, Yocheved, being brought to nurse him instead. It also says in regards to Yosef, all of the descendants of Esav, Yishmael, and Keturah all came to his father Yaakov's burial and hung their crowns on his coffin. When Yaakov was then brought to Ma'aras HaMachpelah, the cave of doubles where all the forefathers are buried, Esav showed up and said that he should be buried there, as it wasn't fair that Leah had taken his spot. So they said he had sold his firstborn rights to Yaakov, so they were arguing if that included the burial rights to the cave, so they sent Naphtali, who was very fast, to run to Egypt to fetch the document. In the meanwhile, the son of Dan, Choshim, who couldn't hear very well, saw that the burial was being delayed, so he stepped forward and smashed Esav's head with his staff, killing him, and Esav's eyes popped out and landed at Yaakov's feet, causing Yaakov to open his eyes and smile. Moshe buried Yosef, and he knew where he was buried, as only Serach, the daughter of Asher, was alive from his generation, so she said that Yosef had been encased in a metal coffin and placed in the Nile River to bless their water. So Moshe went there and told Yosef to either show himself or be absolved of his oath, and the coffin arose to the surface. Others say this happened, but in the royal catacombs. There are further points in the burial of Yosef. When he was initially sold as a slave to Egypt, he was purchased by Potiphar, who is later referenced in the verse as being called Potipharah in the female, as it says that he purchased Yosef for inappropriate reasons, but the angel Gabriel made him into a eunuch. There are further points on him and the passing and burial of Moshe, who it says was buried in the portion of Gad and carried there by the divine presence. Further, it said, in spite of all this, Moshe did not die, and in spite of the Torah containing many references to the places of his burial, the Roman Empire sent many people to find it, but no matter where they stood, it always seemed out of reach. There are further points on all this, and it's explained that Moshe desperately wanted to enter Israel so he could fulfill all the obligations specific to the land of Israel. And that's the end of chapter 1. Chapter 2 of Tractate Sotah continues going through the laws of the Sotah ceremony as described in the Torah. The first Mishnah continues midway through the description of the actual process continued from the prior chapter. The next step was that the husband would place her mincha offering on a basket of palm bast and put it in her outstretched hands, which she would need to hold so as to make her tired. The difference between the other mincha offerings and this one is that others start and end in a sacred vessel. This starts only in a palm basket, and the others require oil and frankincense. This requires neither. The others come from wheat or fine barley. This is from unfine barley. Some comment that the same way the adulterer behaved in the manner of an animal, her offering is the same food as animals. The Gemara explains that we make her tired so that if she actually had done adultery, she will just admit it and she won't be made to do the whole Sotah process. The woman in this case is being spared for her own sake, not for the dissolved scroll, which had already been dissolved. It goes through the remaining points as to the performance of mincha offerings and specifics as to how and where they're done. The remaining laws of the process of the mincha offerings are explained. It also additionally explains the opinion that the adulterer acted in the manner of an animal, so the offering is done with animal food, as mentioned. New Mishnah. The Kohen then takes an earthenware vial, puts half a lug of water from the kior into it, although some say a quarter lug, as we also use less writing, and then goes to the sanctuary, removes a marble stone that had a ring attached to it, and adds enough dirt from there to be visible in the water. The Gemara says some require this to be a new earthenware vial, and the source is debated. Others disagree, and there are additional points. According to some, it debates if there is no dirt, if it would be valid to use ash instead, which is questioned based on the logic of several other discussions. It said that you can use the dirt of decayed vegetables, which are also considered to be earth, but not ashes, which are not considered to be earth. Similar to the dirt being required to be visible in the water, the ashes of the para aduma, the red heifer, must also be, and the spittle during chalitza must also be visible. And some say the blood of the Metzora's bird must be visible. The validity of the last one is debated from a few verses. It also debates if it's valid to add the dirt before the water. Some say no, some say yes, based on verses. New Mishnah. It lists all the verses from the Torah describing the Sotah ceremony, which are written on the scroll to be dissolved, and there are a few opinions as to which particular of the verses are used. The Gemara explains the debate as to which verses to be used is based on a debate of the interpretation of the verses. There are further additional points on the extremely serious negativity of adultery. New Mishnah. The Sotah scroll is not written on wood, papyrus, or on unfinished parchment. It must be written on a finished parchment scroll, and the ink cannot be gum, ferrous sulfate, or otherwise. It has to be ink and writing which is capable of being erased. The Gemara says based on a related verse, it shows that the Sotah scroll must be written by day in sequence after she took the oath and with etched in parchment lines. It must also be written on only one page and dissolved all at once, not one letter at a time. It also asks several particular specific questions in regards to this process which go unresolved. It additionally describes the oaths the Sotah must take along with their particular wording. New Mishnah. Afterwards, the woman says amen twice, once for the curse and once for the oath, once for the warned man and once for other men, once that she wasn't an adulterer during the first stage of marriage and again during the second stage, once that she didn't do adultery before Yibum and for after the marriage, and once that she did not commit this sin, and if she had, the water should enter her. Some say the double amen is also that she had not committed adultery and will not in the future. The husband has no jurisdiction with what she did prior to betrothal or after her divorce, even if they remarry after her. Generally, if the circumstance is that if she had cohabited, she wouldn't be prohibited to the husband, he cannot stipulate anything regarding the Sotah ceremony by it. The Gemara says, if a woman pending Yibum cohabits with another man, she cannot do Yibum based on this discussion, although others disagree. It additionally debates the validity of the opinion that if a husband can make his wife take this vow on the future, if this would still remain in effect after a divorce, and it's also said this is a valid stipulation. It also debates whether a woman can be made to redo the Sotah ceremony on several occasions for several acts of suspected adultery. This debate is explained to be in a situation of one husband and two different adulterers if they can be made to do several Sotah ceremonies. And that's the end of Chapter 2. Chapter 3 of Tractate Sotah continues on the laws of the Sotah ceremony. The first Mishnah says the next step of the ceremony, continuing from the prior chapter, he would take the mincha offering out of the palm basket and put it in a service vessel and put it in her hand, and the Kohen puts his hand underneath and waves it with her, brings it to the altar, scoops out a kometz handful, and burns it on the altar, and the remainder is eaten by the Kohanim. It's debated if she's given the bitter waters to drink before or after the mincha offering, although it's agreed it's valid if it's done before. The Gemara cites verses to explain the source for the manner of the joint waving. It further lists the debate as to whether the Sotah water is drunk before or after the mincha offering. A related source says she only drinks the water after the mincha offering, after the scroll is dissolved, and after she accepts the oath in accordance with this related opinion. The specification of the water being drunk only after the scroll is dissolved is to say it's only done once the writing on the scroll is fully dissolved, without anything remaining. The point on this being after the oath is just unnecessary. The dispute as to when the Sotah drink is done is based on the interpretation of a number of verses, which are explained as to the specific teachings in regards to the sequence derived from each verse. There are further points, and it says the source that the actual water must be bitter. New Mishnah. If, prior to the erasure of the scroll, she refuses to undergo the Sotah process, the scroll is put away and can't be reused, and her unoffered mincha offering is scattered on the ashes. If this occurred after the scroll was erased, the Sotah admitting that she was an adulterer, the Sotah water is poured out and her mincha offering is also scattered. If she doesn't admit that she's a Sotah but still refuses to drink the water at this point, then she's forced to drink it. If she was guilty of adultery and for some reason decided to go through with this entire ceremony, the physical symptoms would miraculously be immediately visible and she would be taken outside so the courtyard wouldn't become impure. If the woman had merits of good deeds, the effects could be held in abeyance for several years. Some say it's very important to teach daughters Torah to understand the merit of learning Torah. Others disagree, saying you shouldn't. It's also said that a woman prefers 1 kav and physical intimacy over 9 kav and abstinence, which will be explained. It's also said a foolish pietist, a cunning, wicked person, an overly ascetic, abstinent woman, or a person who is injured from being excessively ascetic have an extremely negative impact on the world. The Gemara is a source which says that ferrous sulfate cannot be used in the Sotah scroll, and it's discussed. Some say it's valid to use in the writing of other scriptural verses, and it's debated if it's permitted in the passage of the Sotah, and that's written in the actual Torah scroll. This is relevant if somebody wants to erase the actual verses from a Torah scroll while doing the Sotah ceremony. It debates this from a few sources. It also explains the Mishnah is in accordance with the opinion that the Sotah drinks the water after the mincha offering, based on the mentioned sequence, although he would agree with the opinion that merit would hold the punishment in abeyance. The reason why she's rushed out, as mentioned, is to prevent impurity, which is said to be from menstruation. It also cites sources for the concept of her punishment being held in abeyance. It has related discussion on the concept of an individual's punishment being held in abeyance for the merits he's done generally. It also explains the debate as to whether you should teach your daughters Torah, and the point on preference of intimacy over several kav refers to amounts of food. An example of a foolish pietist is a man who refuses to help a drowning woman as it's improper. A cunning evildoer is someone who explains his position to a judge before the other litigant comes, or somebody who gives advice to others in regards to their property ownership, or rules leniently by himself and strictly by other people, and other examples. It also speaks very negatively about an individual who studies scripture and Mishnah, but does not serve Torah scholars, which is explained to mean learning Gemara. It also defines an Am Haaretz, an ignoramus, as somebody who doesn't fulfill many essential commandments. It also speaks on other negative attributes, such as a student who hasn't reached a status where he can rule Torah law, who does so anyways, and on a Torah scholar who can do this and chooses not to. The time is said to be at the age of 40, or somebody of equivalent wisdom. It also lists many forms of extreme over-asceticism, of self-harm and similar, that should never be done, and the negativities of insincerity in regards to service. New Mishnah. Some say that merit does not hold the Sotah's punishment in abeyance, as then people would take this less seriously, and also anybody who was innocent and was unaffected by the Sotah waters would then be looked poorly upon. Others say that the punishment is held in abeyance, but she just slowly wastes away and dies at her time. If her mincha offering became impure before it was put in the service vessel, it's like all other impure mincha offerings and can be redeemed. If it became impure after it was put in the service vessel, it must be burned. It must be burned if the woman admits she was an adulteress, or witnesses testify she did, or if she refuses to drink the water, or if her husband doesn't want her to drink the water, or her husband cohabited with her on the way to the temple, or if she was married to a Kohen. This does not apply if she was a Kohen married to a Yisrael. The difference between a male and female Kohen, or that only the mincha offering of a female Kohen is eaten, only a female Kohen can become permanently disqualified from a Kohen, only a female Kohen can become impure from the dead, and only a male Kohen can eat of kachei kachim offerings. There are some general legal differences between a man and a woman. A woman, if she contracts tzara'as leprosy, does not need to grow out her hair and tear her garments. Only a man can impose a Nazirite vow onto his son. Only a man can cut his hair at the end of a Nazirite term imposed by his father. Only a man can betroth his daughter. Only a man can sell his daughter as a maidservant. Only a woman is stoned while clothed. Only a woman is not hanged when she receives capital punishment, and only a woman cannot be sold for theft. The Gemara discusses the remaining points on the sequence of the mincha offering as to when it's burnt. It cites verses for these points in regards to the listed legal differences between a female and male Kohen and between a general male and female. And that's the end of chapter 3. Chapter 4 of Tractate Sotah continues on the laws of the Sotah ceremony. The first Mishnah says, a woman in the first stage of marriage, a rosin, or a woman pending yibum, the levirate marriage, do not do the Sotah ceremony, and they also don't collect a marriage contract, which is based on a verse. This would also apply to a widow married to a Kohen Gadol, a divorcee, or similar married to a Kohen, and an illegitimate individual or a Nesonite married to a Yisrael, which are all prohibited. Also included is a woman who admits to adultery if there are witnesses that testify to her adultery, or if she refuses to undergo the Sotah ceremony. If the husband said she won't do the Sotah ceremony, or if he cohabited with her on the way to the temple, she does not do the Sotah ceremony, but does collect her marriage contract. If the husband died before they could do the Sotah ceremony, Beis Shammai says they get the marriage contract and don't do the Sotah ceremony. Beis Hillel says they either do the Sotah ceremony or don't receive a marriage contract. Similarly, it's debated if a man's pregnant or nursing ex-wife can be made to do the Sotah ceremony or collect a marriage contract. Some say yes, as he can remarry her after a period. It's also debated if an Ilonis, a physically unique woman that exhibits male characteristics, an old woman, or some other woman who can't give birth, if they can do the Sotah ceremony or receive a marriage contract. Some say yes, as they can stay married. If the wife of a Kohen does the Sotah ceremony and is innocent, she can stay with her husband. If the husband is sterile, she can do the Sotah ceremony. A man can warn his wife to not be with any man, any relative, but there's no validity to warning a wife against being secluded with a minor boy or with someone who's not a man. The court, instead of the husband, would warn the woman if the husband became a deaf-mute, insane, or imprisoned. This is not to make her do the Sotah ceremony, but only to make her not receive a marriage contract. Some say it could be done for the Sotah ceremony if the husband is in prison, as he could do it when he leaves. The Gemara cites sources for the point that a woman pending yibum does not do the Sotah ceremony. There are further verses as sources for this topic debated on. It also debates based on this if a woman acts promiscuously, if she requires a warning or not to not receive her marriage contract, as to whether or not she sinned, or if she requires a warning prior. It's discussed from this conversation, and it said that she does need a prior warning. It also asks, in such a situation, if the husband is allowed to stay married to her, which is debated. It also asks if a husband can cancel his warning against seclusion or not, also discussed based on this topic, and we cite a source that the husband may cancel the warning, which is further qualified, and it says that he cannot cancel the warning after the seclusion occurs. The debate between Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai over the marriage contract is on whether a debt in an uncollected document is viewed as collected or not. Some say everybody agrees an Ilonis does not do the Sotah ceremony or receive a marriage contract, as she can't have children. Others disagree. This point, along with the others, are further debated at length. It debates what it means that he can't warn his wife to not seclude with somebody who's not a man by these laws. It debates if this includes an impotent man, or possibly it refers to a non-Jewish person who obviously is considered to be a man, but it uses this as an expression by these laws, as his cohabitation doesn't forbid the wife to her husband here. Some say it simply means he can't warn his wife to not seclude herself with an animal. Some say it references simple physical contact, depending on your definition as to what constitutes an actual act of cohabitation. It gets into a general discussion as to what constitutes positive attributes in a wife, and similar, along with a few unresolved questions on these laws. It also says if either the husband or wife are blind, they don't do the Sotah ceremony, or if either of them are lame or with hands missing. This is based on verses, and it's also not done if the woman is mute. And that's the end of chapter 4. Chapter 5 of Tractate Sotah continues discussing the laws of the Sotah ceremony along with related points. The first Mishnah discusses an incident mentioned earlier in Tractate Brachos, page 27b and further, wherein the Nasi, the prince at the time, Rabban Gamliel, was temporarily replaced and there was a large influx of students and legal resolutions to unresolved debates. So it goes through a number of those here, some of which involves the Sotah ceremony. It says, based on a few verses, that just as the water of the Sotah ceremony tests the woman, they also test the male adulterer. Further, she's prohibited to be with the husband and also to be with the guy she did adultery with. It was also taught in regards to the laws of purity that a loaf of bread with secondary contamination, such as that it was within an earthenware vessel, can contaminate another item to create a tertiary contamination. It also expounded on the verses teaching the boundaries of the cities portioned to the tribe of Levi, teaching that they received 1,000 cubits of open space and 2,000 further cubits of the Shabbos Tichum boundary. Some say the 2,000 cubits were in fields and vineyards. The verse of the Oz Yashir song by the splitting of the Red Sea, it redundantly says to say. Some say to teach that they repeated it verse after verse, like the way the Hakhel prayer said. Some say they actually said it like how they say the Shema prayer. It's also taught, based on other verses, that Job, Eov, only ever acted out of love for God. The Gemara clarifies that both points as to the punishment and forbiddenness mentioned by the Sotah above refer to the adulterer. Based on this exposition, it's debated as to the interpretation of various verses between these opinions and as to the various necessity for specific wording used in scripture. The point is debated in regards to a comparison of the laws of Sotah to the laws of impurity in a Sheretz creature and potential laws derived from them. The remaining points on the logic of this debate are further clarified. It also goes through the points on secondary and tertiary impurity as mentioned in regards to its source. The source for this concept is further described from a comparison to related laws by the transmission of ritual impurity and related points as in regards to the source that kodesh, holy offering food, can become impure from a fourth transmission. It also further describes if a secondary impurity can create a tertiary impurity by unconsecrated produce. It also explains the debate as to how the Jewish people sing the song as they left the Red Sea after it split. It additionally goes through the points on Eov and says that there were these two students sitting before the sage Arufah. One said he had a verse read to him in a dream, "How abundant is your goodness that you have stored away for those who fear you." The other student said he had dreamed of the verse, "But all who take refuge in you will rejoice, they will sing joyously forever, and those who love your name will exult in you." Arufah said that they were both completely righteous, as one serves God out of love and the other out of fear. And that's the end of chapter 5. Chapter 6 of Tractate Sotah continues on the laws of the Sotah ceremony and adultery. The first Mishnah says, if somebody warned their wife to not seclude herself with a man and she secluded herself with the man, no matter how the husband hears about this, he must divorce her and pay the marriage contract. Some say he must hear it when it's widespread gossip. If, after a single witness, even a Canaanite slave man or woman, say they saw her commit the adultery, she does not do the Sotah ceremony and does not receive her marriage contract. People who might not like the woman in question, be it her mother-in-law, sister-in-law, co-wife through Yibum, or stepdaughter, they're all believed if they testify she did adultery to make her do the Sotah ceremony, but not to lose her marriage contract. It explains the verse and its necessity to show that a single witness's testimony is uniquely valid here. If one witness, male or female, testifies she did adultery and another witness, male or female, testifies that she did not do adultery, she would still do the Sotah ceremony. If one witness says she did adultery and two say she did not, she would still do the Sotah ceremony. If two witnesses say she did adultery and one said she did not, she would not do the Sotah ceremony. The Gemara discusses the scriptural sources and necessity for these laws. It debates the validity of secondary and valid witnesses coming after the testimony of a single valid witness. The repetitiveness in the final point of the Mishnah is to show that if there are invalid witnesses involved, it's to show we still follow the majority of opinions even if it ends up resulting in a leniency. And that's the end of chapter 6. Chapter 7 of Tractate Sotah continues going through the laws of the Sotah ceremony now in regards to the oath taken during the Sotah ceremony. The first Mishnah says, the passage of the Sotah can be read in any language, as can the confession of tithes, the saying of the Shema, prayer, the after-meal blessing, oaths by testimony, and by deposit. The following must be said in Hebrew: the Bikurim first fruits declaration, the Chalitza declaration by the Levirate marriage, the blessings and curses on Mount Gerizim and Mount Avel, the priestly blessing, the blessing of the Kohen Gadol, the passage read by the king at the Hakhel gathering, the passage read by the decapitation of a calf, a ceremony done in the temple times if a murder victim was found, and the wartime addresses of the Cohen. The scriptural sources for every single one of these is brought, and it explains the sequence by the blessings by Mount Gerizim and Mount Abel. The Gemara further describes the sources for all these points in the manner of how several of these prayers or blessings were said. There are further points on this, and it explains that a congregation can pray in any language, although an individual should pray in Hebrew. It further goes through sources for the language said by the remaining various blessings and prayers. It also more precisely describes the sequence of the blessings and curses by the Jewish people done between the mountains before they entered Israel, and there's debate as to the particular location and placement of the mountains. It also describes points on the crossing of the Jordan and the carrying of the ark, as they did. The ark was placed in the Jordan River and the water split, although it debates as to how high the water split, along with other points such as when the spies carried the fruit back to the Jewish people from the land of Israel, how they carried it in regards to the placement of the men. It speaks further on the incident with the spies' incursion into Israel. It says that Kalev went and prayed at the graves of the forefathers to be able to do the right thing, and Yeshua didn't do this as Moshe had already given his blessing earlier. It explains the names of the giant inhabitants and on the fertility of the land of Israel. It explains how Yeshua spoke good of the land in spite of the negative reports of the other spies, starting off speaking as if he would give a negative report and then switching to a positive one. It also said is that the spies thought it was a poor land, as the Canaanite inhabitants would die as they traveled, but that was so that way they would be preoccupied and wouldn't notice them. Or possibly that it was the passing of Job that caused the inhabitants to be preoccupied. It also describes the punishment of the spies. It said that they died from their tongues extending down to their navel and maggots crawling back and forth between their mouth and navel. Some say that they just died of a throat inflammation. There are further points on the crossing of the Jordan. It goes through the remaining verses on this topic. There are further points on the miraculous events during this. It says how the enemies they fought were miraculously stricken with various afflictions, including by a flying venom-spitting insect that aided them. It also describes the stone placement on the breastplate of the Kohen Gadol. It debates on the order of the placement of the names of the stones and related points. It also describes the incident with Yosef and Potiphar's wife. It said that Potiphar left the house as there was an idolatrous holiday, and Potiphar's wife attempted to cohabit with Yosef, and Yosef almost conceded, but then he saw a vision of his father who spoke to him, so he stabbed his fingers against the ground, hurting himself and preventing an act of cohabitation. This is further described, and it says that when Pharaoh met Yosef, he spoke to him in every language, but only Yosef spoke Hebrew, and the Pharaoh made him swear to not tell anybody. There are related verses expounded on. It also speaks on the splitting of the Red Sea. There's a few opinions as to how that went down. Famously, it says that a man by the name of Nachshon ben Aminadab, the prince of the tribe of Yehuda, while everybody else was arguing as to what to do, simply walked into the sea, and when it covered him, that's when the water split. It further describes the placement of the tribes by the mountains, and it also says that by Mount Sinai, the general principles of the Torah were taught to Moshe, and the details were taught in the tent of meeting. Others say that everything was taught on Sinai, and it was reiterated later. It also goes through the curses said by Mount Gerizim and Mount Abel and their meanings. New Mishnah. In the temple, the priestly blessing is said all at once, with God's name fully pronounced as written. Outside, it's said in 3 parts, with the other pronunciation of God's name. Outside the temple, the Kohanim raise their hands to shoulder length. In the temple, they raise their hands above their heads, besides for the Kohen Gadol, who doesn't raise his hands higher than the tzitz. Others say that he would actually raise his hands higher. The Gemara goes to a number of various sources for the above points on the priestly blessings in regards to the language it's said in, the name of God used while reciting it, and where they hold their hands as they do so, and they do it for all Jewish people, facing them in a loud voice. It's also said that prior to their start, the prayer leader calls out Kohanim, or Kohen, if there's just one giving the blessing. It further speaks on the importance of the Kohanim giving this blessing, that if they do so, they themselves are blessed, that it's done during the avoda portion of prayer and not after. Also that the cup of blessing, a cup of wine with a blessing set on it during the after meal blessings, should be done by a generous individual. It further speaks on the great negativity of misery. It's also said if a synagogue is entirely comprised of Kohanim, they should still give the priestly blessing to the other Jewish people out working in the fields. People shouldn't stand behind the Kohanim as they give the blessing, and it's said that to the sides is still considered to be in front of them. It It is also said that once the Torah scroll has been opened, no one should talk at all, even about halacha. The Kohanim must also wash their hands prior to giving the priestly blessing, and they also say blessings prior, which are listed. It gives additional points as to the proper manner of giving the priestly blessings, and on the congregation saying amen afterwards, and after other blessings, for instance, that they must wait until the reader fully finishes his blessing before they say amen. It's also said that the one who reads the Haftorah from the Book of Prophets must initially also read from the Torah, and they wait to read the Haftorah until the Torah scroll has been rolled. It's also said that the congregation shouldn't leave the synagogue until the Torah scroll has been removed, and other points. It also lists the blessings the congregation says as they receive the priestly blessing. This is further discussed along with the placement of various other blessings that are said in prayer. Additionally, it's also said that the Kohanim giving the blessing have the Shekhinah, the divine presence, at their backs. The reason the priestly blessing in the temple was said in one period without the pauses is because they didn't say amen in the temple, which is sourced from a few places. New Mishnah. On Yom Kippur, the Kohen Gadol would read several blessings from the Torah. A Torah scroll would be handed to the head of the synagogue, who would hand it to the deputy Kohen Gadol, who would hand it to the Kohen Gadol, who would read particular Torah portions from it, the portion of Achrimois, but on the 10th, he rolls it up and holds it to his chest, declares, "More than what I have read before you is written here." Then he reads another portion by heart, and on the 10th, that is in the book of Numbers, and then says 8 blessings on the Torah, on the sacrificial service, for thanksgiving, for forgiveness, for the temple, for the Jewish people, for the Kohanim, for Jerusalem, and for the rest of prayer. The Gemara says the sequence of passing the Torah scroll doesn't prove that honor can be given to a student before his teacher, as all of that was done for the Kohen Gadol's honor. Prior, the Kohen Gadol was sitting in the women's courtyard. It further qualifies the remaining points on the reading of the Torah and on the method of saying the blessings after. New Mishnah. Every 7-year cycle, on the year following the final Shemitah year, on that year's Sukkot, the entire Jewish people, men, women, and children, would gather in the temple to hear the Torah be read by the king, called the Hakhel, the gathering. On this day, they would make a wooden platform for the king in the temple. He sits there, a Torah scroll is handed to the head of the synagogue, who hands it to the deputy Kohen Gadol, who hands it to the king, who stands and takes the scroll, but reads from it while sitting. Once the king Agrippa read from the Torah and chose to do so while standing, and he was praised by the sages for this. When he reached the verse, "You may not place over you a foreigner," in reference to the king, he began to cry, as his father was not Jewish, but the Jewish people told him, "Do not fear, Agrippa, you are our brother." The portion the king reads from is, "These are the words until the Shema." He reads the Shema and the verse, "And it will come to pass, and you shall surely tithe, and when you have finished tithing," then he reads the verses regarding the king on the blessings and curses until he concludes, and then he says the same 8 blessings the Kohen Gadol said at the end of his service in the prior Mishnah, although he switches the blessing for forgiveness with a blessing for holidays. The Gemara qualifies the precise date and timings that this would be done on. Again, all this procedure was done for the king's honor. It also says that King Agrippa and the other kings who weren't from King David's dynasty would sit in the women's courtyard. King Agrippa's renouncement of his honor was proper, as it was for a mitzvah. It also says that them trying to flatter Agrippa was not proper, and it caused many later issues. Further on flattery, some say it actually is permissible to flatter the wicked in this world, which is explained to mean that it could be done for your safety, but not to try and gain benefit. It quotes many verses on this, and it speaks on the great negativity of flattery in general and the punishments for it. It further speaks on how terrible flattery and flatterers are, as are scoffers, liars, and people who gossip, which is based on verses. And that's the end of chapter 7. Chapter 8 of Tractate Sotah begins on a bit of a new topic, the laws of the priestly speech given before battle, as discussed in these verses. The first Mishnah says, during wartime, the Kohen, the priest who was anointed for war, would address the nation in Hebrew. It quotes the verses that would be said, that they should not expect mercy from their enemies, and to not be afraid in battle, and that God is with them, as God was against the Philistines and Goliath, and against the Ammonites and Shavach, so too God will be with them now. The Gemara explains the logic of these cited verses, how they reference Moshe speaking Hebrew, so too this was all done in Hebrew. There are additional points on the Kohen who provides this function, and he starts by saying the Shema prayer, so as to say, even if they have only done the basic obligation of saying the Shema prayer in the mornings and evenings, they will be kept safe. There are additional points, and it goes through many verses speaking about Goliath, his size, his parentage, and that his mother was an extremely immoral woman who cohabited with many individuals based on some verses. Goliath's mother actually was said to be Arufah, whose mother-in-law was Naomi, along with further related points. It also speaks further on the Ammonites and Shovach. It also explains how the ark would accompany the Jewish people to war, and some points on Pinchas, who it says was a descendant of both Yisro and Joseph. New Mishnah. There are some exemptions to people who were supposed to go to war. Somebody who had just built a straw or cattle barn, or a woodshed or storehouse, or built, bought, inherited, or was gifted a house, or if he planted a vineyard or 5 fruit-bearing trees, even if there are 5 species, or if the trees were planted, layered, grafted, purchased, inherited, or gifted to him. He's also exempt if he just betrothed the woman, whether she's a virgin or a widow, or if it's a levirate marriage. In fact, if he just finds out that his brother passed away, he can return from the war. All of these prior people need to hear the Kohen speak, but return from the war and are still required to assist with supplying water and food to the troops or to repair roads. They're not exempted from fighting if they had built a gatehouse, portico, or gallery, or planted 4 fruit-bearing trees, or 5 non-fruit-bearing trees, or remarried their divorcee. If it was a forbidden marriage, a widow to a Kohen Gadol, a divorcee or similar to a Kohen, a marriage to an illegitimate individual, or to a Nesonite, the husband is not exempted from the war. Some add that if he rebuilt a house where it once stood, he does not get to return. Some say if the house is made of poor quality temporary materials, he does not return. If somebody built a house and inaugurated it, planted a vineyard and redeemed it, or fully married a woman or did yibum, he does not even need to do anything with the military then at all, not even to supply for the troops or repair the roads. The scriptural sources are all listed. The Gemara further discusses verse sources for these points. This is all spoken on further, including lengthy discourse as to which kinds of planted trees would make valid exemptions from fighting in battle according to these laws. It also qualifies the points on valid marriage exemptions along with the remaining points. It's also said that this order teaches proper conduct, that a man should build a house, plant a vineyard, get a livelihood, and then marry. The remaining points are spoken on. New Mishnah. The remaining verses are listed. It says anybody who is afraid should return home. Some say this means somebody who is afraid of battle. Others say it means somebody who's afraid due to his sins. They can leave under the guise of the other exemptions. Some say it's for the sin of an improper marriage. It also says that stronger men were put at the front lines to inspire the troops, and also men were stationed behind the army with axes to prevent anybody from trying to run away from the battle and causing even more people to be killed. All of these exemptions apply by voluntary wars. By wars of a mitzvah, like Yehoshua's conquering of Israel, nobody's exempt. Others say it's that the exemptions are by a war of mitzvah, and there are no exemptions by a war of obligation. The Gemara explains the difference in opinions in regards to exemptions for sin. It's if somebody does a rabbinic violation. Sources are brought, and it's said that even according to these, if the man's actually afraid of battle, he'd be exempt. The dispute in regards to fought wars is clarified. Everybody agrees that the wars of Yehoshua were obligatory, and the wars of King David are debated. Some say it was a mitzvah, as it was done for preemptive protection. Others say it was voluntary. This was practically relevant in regards to whether the individuals were considered to be engaged in doing a mitzvah and therefore exempt from doing other mitzvahs. And that's the end of chapter 8. Chapter 9, the final chapter of Tractate Sotah, discusses the laws of the found murdered body and the repentance ceremony involving it as discussed in these verses. The first Mishnah says, in regards to the scriptural laws of if a murdered body is found, the Eglah Arufah ceremony was done, involving slaughtering a calf and prayers for atonement. It's done in Hebrew. 3 judges of the Sanhedrin would go to the corpse's location, although some say it was 5. This would not be done if the body was found under a pile of rocks or hanging from a tree or floating in the water, based on verses. This would also not be done if the body was found near the borders of Israel, or near a mostly non-Jewish town, or near a town where there is no court. The body is measured from a town only where there is a court, which will be explained. The Gemara explains the source for this being done in Hebrew, along with the debate on the amount of judges. It further argues as to exactly which members of the court must be present during the ceremony. Based on a source, it would imply that the entire Sanhedrin was required to go out for this. It also defines which opinion would hold that the scriptural source would imply this is not done if the corpse was found covered or similar. It discusses related points in the laws of field charity. The further points in these laws are clarified. New Mishnah. If the corpse in question was found precisely between 2 towns, each one of them must offer 1 calf, and the city of Jerusalem does not do the service. If the head and body are found separately, it's debated as to which it's measured from. It's additionally debated where precisely on the corpse the measurement to the cities begins. Some say from the navel, some say from the nose, some say from the neck. The Gemara says it discusses the corpse being precisely between 2 cities, as his opinion holds that precision by measuring is possible. By Jerusalem, these laws don't apply, as it wasn't given to one tribe, it was given to the whole nation. The dispute in regards to if the body goes according to where the head or the body were found is a debate as to whether the head or body would move further during a decapitation. The debate as to the location on the body of measurement is that some say it's the nose, as that's the source of breathing, others say the navel, as that's where your stomach is, others say it's debated based on the development of a fetus. The remaining opinions are discussed. New Mishnah. The judges of the Sanhedrin then left, and the town's judges would bring a female calf of cattle that had not been pulled with a yoke, and it's permissible if the calf has a blemish and it's brought down to the hard valley and it's decapitated from the back, and that location can no longer be used to plant or work, although it can be used to comb flax or chisel stones. They wash their hands there and say, "Our hands have not spilled this blood and our eyes did not see." This is to say that they had no part in the murder or assisting the murder. The Kohanim say the verse, "Atone for your people Israel that you have redeemed, O God, and do not place innocent blood in the midst of your people Israel." The remaining parts of this verse say that the blood of the murdered individual will hereby be atoned. The Gemara asks as to why a blemished calf can be used here, and it can't be learned from other offerings like the red heifer, which can't be blemished, that the same applies here. It debates this comparison from several verses and sources. The remaining points on these laws are qualified, and it also speaks of the importance of escorting people to safety, and if you have nobody with you, you should learn Torah as you walk, and that somebody will be safe even if they're only escorted the first few steps of their journey. It discusses various other points on the importance of escorting individuals as they walk for safety. It speaks on some related verses on the prophet Elisha, who it says was punished with illness, as he caused those bears to attack those children who mocked him, as he pushed away Gehazi, who took gifts from an Aramite general, and he suffered a third illness, which he passed away from. It expounds on these verses and speaks of an additional incident of a sage pushing somebody away, and it having negative consequences. Specifically, the incident involving the sage Yehoshua ben Parachia and Yeshu HaNitzri. Now, some quick background. Yeshu HaNitzri is often translated as Jesus of Nazareth, but that's not a very accurate literal translation. The word Yeshu, in spite of its similarities, does not translate to Jesus. It's a very commonly used acronym, which stands for Yamach Shemai V'Zichrei, literally may his name and memory be erased. Further, this figure is referenced a few times throughout the Gemara, and particularly here in this source, actually it provides some background as to who this character is and what he did. Specifically, he studied beneath the sage Yehoshua ben Parachia at the time of the sage Shimon ben Shatach, and under the difficult rule of the heretical Hashmona'i king Yanai Janius, and all of these individuals lived around 200 to 150 BCE, so objectively this referenced character of Yeshu must refer to somebody living around 150 to 50 BCE, and because of this, most commentaries explain that this Yeshu figure, as referenced in the Gemara here and in several other sources, does not refer to the historical Jesus of the Christian faith. Anyways, with that aside, it says the story as to how he became a heretic. He had studied beneath the tutelage of Rabbi Yeshua ben Parachia for a while, and together they were traveling back to Jerusalem, and they stopped by an inn, at which point the sage praised the hostess in reference to her deeds, but a student criticized the compliment, thinking it was on the looks of the hostess, and saying she actually wasn't beautiful. So because of this, the sage got upset that his student was thinking about such things and had him excommunicated. The student came begging back to him many times, but Rabbi Yeshua ben Parachia always ignored him. Once, the student again came to beg forgiveness, and the sage happened to be finally willing to forgive him and take him back, but he was in the middle of prayer, so he gestured to the student to wait, and the student thought he was motioning him to leave, pushing him away, so he decided to become a heretic, stood a brick on one end, and worshipped it as an idol. Further, he began to practice forbidden sorcery and caused many others to sin. So when he later re-met his teacher, he refused to repent, saying that it was too late for him as he'd caused others to sin in addition. So by this and others, we see the negativity of pushing people away with both hands. New Mishnah. If the murderer is found before the calf is offered, the calf is no longer slaughtered. If he was found after, the calf must be buried there, as it had atoned for an uncertainty, and the murderer still receives capital punishment. If one witness says he saw the murder and another witness says the other witness did not, the calf is not slaughtered. If one witness says he saw it and two say he did not, the cow is offered. If two witnesses say they saw the murder and one says they did not, they do not slaughter the cow. At one point in time, there was a lot of murders, particularly from a man named Eliezer ben Dinai, also known as Techino ben Perisha, who killed a lot of people, so this whole ceremony was discontinued. Further, at some point, there were many adulterers, so the Sotah ceremony was also discontinued based on a verse. Similarly, when the sages Yossi ben Yoezer and Yossi ben Yehuda passed, the comprehensive knowledge of Torah ceased. Other abolished practices, the Ma'aser confession and the waters and strikers, which will be defined along with the banging of the hammer, and they also instituted the mandatory tithing of questionable tithed produce. The Gemara cites sources for many of these points. It also discusses the point on the witnesses of the murder regarding the atonement calf offering. This was abolished when there were too many murders, as those weren't uncertain murders. Everybody knew who was doing them. In regards to the abolishing of the Sotah ceremony, it cites verses as sources for this principle, and it discusses remaining points on how as time passed, the Jewish people have regressed greatly and increased in wrongdoing and similar. The other abolished practices are described: the Ma'aser tithes, the awareness, which were the Levium singing the verse, "Awaken, lies you sleep, Hashem," which is a reference to God's seeming disregard for our suffering, and was not applicable during the time of peace. The striking that was abolished was that people would make a cut on the forehead of their offerings, so its blood would cover their eyes and make the slaughtering process easier, and it was abolished so it didn't look like a disqualifying blemish. Others say it refers to them striking the animal on the head to slaughter it, which is impermissible according to the laws of slaughtering animals. The banging of the hammers is in reference to the blacksmiths working on the intermediate holidays, which was abolished. New Mishnah: ever since the Sanhedrin ceased, song and wine feasts were abolished. When the early prophets passed, the Urim V'Tumim ceased. When the temple was destroyed, the Shamir worm and the Neifes Tzufim, which will be defined, were lost, as was the people of faith in Israel. Others add, since the destruction of the temple, every day has a curse. The dew does not fall in blessing. Flavor has been removed from fruit, and some add their richness. Some say this was due to the cessation of purity and of tithing, ended the richness of grain. Others say this was caused by harlotry and sorcery. The Gemara cites sources for these points and the prohibition to listen to music, with some exceptions, and the negative effects of doing so. It further defines which constituted the earlier prophets, essentially being King David, the prophet Shmuel, and King Shlomo, and after the Urim V'Tumim ceased. It further speaks on the greatness of various sages. It defines the Shamir worm, a worm used to carve rock by King Shlomo during the building of the first temple, as will be discussed later in Tractate Gittin, as iron tools could not be used. Also, other things that ceased by the destruction of the temple, it says paranda, silk, white glass, the nofes tzufim, which was a honey bread of a sort, and others. There are related teachings on the importance of studying Torah together, even in poverty, and further. New Mishnah: during Vespasian's siege of Jerusalem, there was a band by the sages made on grooms' wreaths and on a particular musical instrument. During Titus's siege, they banned bridal wreaths and teaching the Greek language. During the final parts of the campaign, they banned bridal canopies within the city, although it was later re-permitted. When the sage or the mayor passed, there ceased to be composers of parables. When Ben Azai passed, there ceased to be diligent scholars. When Ben Zoma passed, there ceased to be experts in exegesis. When Rabbi Akiva passed, the glory of Torah ceased. When Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa passed, there ceased to be people of deeds. When Rav Yosef Kantonta passed, there ceased to be pious men, even as he was the last of them. When Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai passed, the splendor of wisdom ceased. When Rabban Gamliel, the elder, passed, the glory of Torah ceased, along with purity and abstinence. When Rabbi Yishmael ben Pavi passed, the splendor of the kahuna, the priesthood, ceased. When Rebbe passed, humility ceased, along with fear of sin. Further, since the temple was destroyed, scholars and highborn have been ashamed and covered their heads, and meritorious men have been impoverished, while the strong and slanderous have triumphed, and there are none who seek, search, or inquire. The only one on whom we can rely is our Father in heaven. Others add, since the temple is destroyed, the scholars become like school teachers. The school teachers became like synagogue attendants, and the synagogue attendants became like commoners, and the commoners became lesser in their wisdom, and there are none who inquire and search. The only one on whom we can rely is our Father in heaven. During the years of Mashiach's coming, insolence will increase, prices will rise, the vine will give fruit, but wine will be scarce, the government will turn to heresy, and there shall be no rebuke. The meeting place of the sages will be used for harlotry, Galilee will be destroyed, and Gavlon desolate, and the people on the borders will wander from town to town unassisted. The wisdom of scholars will decay, and those who fear sin will be hated, and truth will be absent. Youth will shame the elders, and elders will stand before the young. This is all based on verses. The face of the generation will be the face of a dog, and a son is not ashamed before his father. The only one on whom we can rely is our Father in heaven. The Gemara discusses some opinions on which types of bridal wreaths were forbidden, along with the musical instruments and the bridegroom's canopies. In regards to the ban on the Greek language, there's a story when the Hashmonite kings besieged each other, Hyrcanus outside Jerusalem and Aristobulus inside. Some would sneakily pay to have land snuck over the walls so that way they could keep having the daily temple offerings inside, but one man told those facilitating this in Greek that they couldn't take the city as they were maintaining the temple offerings. So they swapped the animal for a pig the next time, and it stuck its foot in the wall as they were carrying it up, and the whole city shook. So they banned teaching Greek. Some say this isn't a reference to the actual language, but rather to the concept of Greek wisdom. Some in Rabban Gamliel's household still had this, as they were close with the government. It further speaks on the great losses as many sages passed from this world, and it says that in spite of that, humility and fear of sin still do exist. And that's the end of chapter 9 and the entire Tractate Sotah. Alright, that was a lot of information, so here's a rough summary of a lot of the practical takeaways from this tractate. There are various particular practices that used to be done in the times of the temple, particularly the Sotah ceremony as described in scripture. Essentially, adultery is forbidden. In the event that there was a serious concern that a woman had committed adultery, and she denies it, if she agrees, she could be brought to the temple, bring a few offerings, and be made to drink these specially prepared bitter waters. If she had not committed adultery, she would receive blessings of fertility and health. If she had, she would swell and burst, as with the other adulterer. During the times of the conquering of Israel and later battles, there was an obligation for a Kohen to speak before the battle, giving blessings and words of preparation. In some instances, if a person had recently married or acquired a house or similar, he'd be exempt from fighting. In the temple, in the year after the sabbatical year, the entire Jewish people, men, women, and children, would gather in Jerusalem for a pilgrimage called the Hakhel gathering to hear the king read from the Torah. In the temple, the priests would recite the priestly blessing. This is still done, albeit with very slight variation. In the times of the temple, if a body was found murdered and the culprit was not found, as atonement, a calf would be beheaded in the area, along with prayers of atonement called the Eglah Arufah, as said within scripture. And that's about everything. Thank you so much for watching.